In section 5.3, we're going to start solving. And so when you see an equal sign, that means you're going to actually get me an answer. Factoring, you're getting two sets of parentheses. And that's a step in the solving process, but it is not solving. Solving goes one step further, and you give me a value, x equals something. And so x equals one solution. You can have one solution, two solutions, or no solution when you're solving equations. And so most often you'll have two solutions. What that means in terms of a graph is that you cross the x-axis in two places. So that's the kind of graph that has two solutions. If you just touch the x-axis in one place, if I can get down there and touch it, then that's your one solution. And if you look at a graph and it never touches the x-axis, that would be a no solution type of situation. So we're going to go ahead, and first thing is set each one equal to 0. So you're going to subtract x and subtract 30 from both sides. So you have x squared minus x minus 30 equals 0. Next step, you factor. And you notice there's an equal sign in here, so that's one reason that it's solving. So now we're going to factor it. We know that because the second sign is negative, we have a plus and minus. And two numbers that will multiply to be negative 30 and add to be negative 1 would be negative 6 and negative 5. Multiply those together, you get negative 30. You add them together, you get negative 1. So now, the zero factor property, or what it says that if I multiply anything by 0, I get 0. So that means if either one of these is equal to 0, then the answer will be 0. So now I set each factor equal to 0 and you solve it. So that would be x equals negative 5 and x equals positive 6. And those are the two answers. When you say solve, this is factor and this is solve. So I have negative 5 and 6 are the two answers. Alright, so let's go on to the next problem. Again, we have to move the 10x over. And you want to put these, when you move this and subtract 10x from both sides, you want to put these, you want to order your expression by descending powers of x. So you'll have your x squared term first, your x term second, and then the constant term last. And all of that, again, is equal to 0. So you set everything equal to 0. Then you're going to factor, which means greatest common factor first if there is one, and there's not. So we have a times c is equal to negative 24. B is equal to negative 10. Okay, so we have to have, because that's second sign's a negative, one of my two numbers is plus and one is minus. So our two numbers will be 12 and 2, and it needs to be a negative 10, so it's negative 12 and positive 2 are the two numbers we're going to use, just like we did in 5.2. Split the middle term, so you have 3x squared minus 12x plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. Group the first two numbers and the second two numbers. Factor out the greatest common factor from the first set, which is 3x. So that means I have 3x times x minus 4. And the greatest common factor in this second set of numbers is a 2. So I'll bring the 2 out front, and what's left is x minus 4 equals 0. So now the two factors are 3x plus 2 times x minus 4. So I've got it factored. Now I have to solve. So we set each factor equal to 0. 3x minus 2 equals 0. Or excuse me, plus 2. And then x minus 4 equals 0. So this one's easy. Solving for x, I just add the 4 across. On this one you have to subtract 2. So you have 3x equals negative 2. And then you divide by 3. So x is equal to negative 2/3. And so those are the answers you put in the solution box. X equals negative 2/3 and 4. And that's your answer. Okay. All right, let's look at another example. There's not as many examples on this homework or on this set of notes. Now we have x squared minus 2x equals 0. Well, moving 0 over doesn't do anything for us because we've already got everything equal to 0. That's what we want. Look for a greatest common factor, which in this case is an x. So you have x, and then you're left with x minus 2 when you factor out your x. Now remember that this is a factor. That x is a factor. So we set x equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0 to solve it. Well, there's one. That is that's an answer. And this one we solve, and x equals 2. The one you're going to forget, if you forget one, is this one right here. For some reason, when you have that lonely x by itself, you tend to forget what to do with it. And so you have to remember. That's something that's going to be a little challenging to remember. But that is actually an answer. X equals 0 and x equals 2 are your two answers. So it crosses the x-axis. If you drew a picture of this, it would cross the x-axis at the origin, where x is 0, and at 2. And it would open up. So it would be something like this. Okay? Now, looking at number 4, we see our x squared is over here instead of on the left. We're going to leave it there, and the reason we're going to leave it there is because it's positive. And remember, I always want that x squared term to be positive. So I'm going to leave that there and move the 8x and the 24, which means I'm going to subtract 8x and subtract 24. So now we have 0 equals 2x squared minus 8x minus 24. So everything's equal to 0, so we're going to factor completely, which means I've got to factor out a greatest common factor, since there is one. So that's going to be x squared minus 4x minus 12. Now I need to look, since there's just an x squared, there's no number in front, I can possibly factor it without having to do a lot of work. We know we have an x plus and an x minus factor, because the second negative means that I have a plus and a minus. Two numbers that multiply to be negative 12 and add to be negative 4. Well, 6 and 2, we have 6 times 2 is negative 12. Negative 6 times positive 2. And then if I add those two, negative 6 and positive 2, I get negative 4. So that's my factors. Now this number out here is not going to be involved in the solution. It's part of the factoring, but we only look at the factors with x's. We only look at the x's for solutions because that's what we're looking for, the value of x that solves the equation. So you say x plus 2 equals 0, x minus 6 equals 0. Solve it. So if x is negative 2 and x equals 6. So we have negative 2 and 6 are the answers that solve. And how would you check it? We haven't really talked about checking. Well, you'd put those numbers into the equation. You have 8 times negative 2 plus 24 will equal 2 times negative 2 squared. Well, that's negative 16 plus 24 will equal 2 times 4, which is 8. And that's correct. That one checks out. Now we put a 6 in there. 8 times 6 plus 24 is equal to 2 times 6 squared. Well, that's 36 times 2, so that's 72. And this is going to be 24 plus 48 which is 72. So that one checks out. And so if you wanted to check your answers, you would just put them back in the original equation and check them. Okay. I believe this is 5-3 we're working on. Yeah, I believe that's the end of 5-3. So we're going to stop there.